the 8th of November 2020. I'm Susan Marsden. I'm interviewing Tobias Chisnall, who has returned probably temporarily to Australia during this year, and I asked him to talk to us about what I'm calling my COVID year, his COVID year. So Tobias, to begin with, can you just tell me where and when you were born and how you were educated, what your profession is?
I was born in 1991 in Sydney, in Camperdown, and I grew up in Canberra, and I am a professional violinist.
And where did you get your music education?
Well, I went to Canberra Grammar School and Narrabundah College in Canberra, and then I studied at the School of Music, the ANU School of Music in Canberra, then at the Sydney Conservatorium, and then at the Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh in the United States.
Which was why you were in America when the pandemic.
That's right, yes.
So can you tell me the early days? What were you doing and what was the impact to begin with?
The early days, well, the last concert I did was in early March with the Erie Philharmonic, one of the orchestras I work with. And at that time, we were talking about the virus and its possible effects. And the general consensus was that this was something we really needed to deal with to protect older people. That was one of the themes of those conversations. The next day I went to a Pittsburgh Symphony performance, and then that was really the last thing. After that, the sort of shutdowns and things started to happen, and then really no one knew how long that was going to last, but there was with hindsight, very optimistic expressions of 2 weeks, a month, and that just really flabbergasted us all.
Did you expect to have such a dire impact on your own musical life?
There was a tremendous amount of uncertainty about what it would mean, and people were all trying to figure that out.
Was there advice locally about what to do?
There was local advice that was conflicting and changing, of course. But no, I'm not sure anyone really... I'm sure probably scientists and people who understood the virus better thought
you're in for a long haul.
This is a long haul thing. But really people were just responding to the circumstances.
So that was the first step. And that was when?
This was March.
Quite early then, yeah. Then you had, and presumably because in the absence of national guidance, was it the city authorities or the state which was giving advice or instructions?
Both. I think the governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolfe, announced sort of stay-at-home orders at some point.
Yep.
I think that was in late March, possibly early April.
And mask wearing?
The mask wearing, that was almost on a sort of more individual institution basis. Yeah. So I recall that like the sort of grocery shops and things very early had policies in place.
Where did your first mask come from? It's quite an interesting story linking back to Australia.
Yes, well, yeah, in the end actually, because we'd had in Australia earlier that year and late 2019, the big bushfires, a lot of Australians had bought masks and this sort of protective equipment. And so actually they were really hard to find in the US. And so Mum and Dad sent Maria and I, my girlfriend, a package of 6 N95 masks, which they, secretly wrote on, because it was my birthday in May, birthday headdress, birthday headgear or something like that. So just as a sent in the mail. So they were very useful. They were very useful.
Yeah, I remembered that. I'd forgotten it. Yeah. So tell me about the impact then as progressively the opportunities for performance closed down, didn't they?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
And there was this sort of steady trickle of cancellations. I recall one day we drove all the way to Charleston, West Virginia, 3.5 hours away, to begin that concert cycle, and then it was cancelled, that day. So we drove back the next morning.
Dear.
And to be fair, it was so uncertain. People didn't know what was going to happen, how long things were going to be for, what they needed to do exactly. So yeah, it was a sort of trickle of responses.
So, and it must have had an impact on both of you, all of you really, all of you musicians, economically more broadly in terms of just having an income.
Yeah, that was really bad. And I think for a lot of my colleagues, my sort of age, practicing really hard, taking auditions, all the auditions got cancelled for one thing, and have been really since that time. And we were working in orchestras and performing and trying to get our careers started. And so I think that's going to be one of the long-term, really devastating, bad effects of this pandemic. Will be able to force a lot of people out of these careers who are very talented and could have otherwise made excellent careers just out of necessity.
Did some of them go home? Because many of you are international students, aren't you? As is your girlfriend too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, and initially in March, there were lots of rumours about border closures and things. So a couple of Australian friends of mine left in March on one of the early flights, or sort of last commercial flights. Some of my South American friends also had to make decisions to leave, and it was just, a lot of chaos too with people's leases, apartment things. You imagine, leaving a lease 3 months early. So luckily, all of the landlords that I were aware of were generally very understanding of that and said, look, because you had people who suddenly couldn't earn any money, were living relatively paycheck to paycheck, and had to leave the country, So it was a difficult, confusing time, yes.
So what did you and Maria decide to do about your living arrangements?
Well, once we realised we were going to need to quarantine and isolate, we moved in together in my apartment and really hunkered down. So we were practicing, we built forts out of duvets and things so that the neighbours wouldn't be too bothered by our practicing. And really, luckily that apartment is opposite a lovely park in Pittsburgh, so we were still able to go for walks and still be safe in that way.
Was it hard to shop?
Yes, initially, and people were again very uncertain and worried about that, although the grocery shops did a really excellent job. They had policies in place, they had masks, they had people spraying down shopping trolleys with disinfectant, and really managed that well. And there were also really great policies to do with allowing older people and disabled people in for the first sort of hour that they were open so that they could get things. So there were many comforting solidarity sorts of things too.
Yes, intelligent responses. Your family here must have been worried about you.
They were, and certainly I'd say we started speaking even more. It's not like we weren't speaking before, but really checking in every couple of days, and things like Zoom were wonderful for that. We could speak and talk about what was going on. Yes.
You had to come back to Australia though, didn't you? And that was for visa reasons. But you had to obviously find a flight. Was that difficult? And can you describe that?
So, yes, I was also in the middle of this process applying for new visas, having been in the US for 4 and a bit years as a student. So it was extremely confusing. Yes, trying to figure out, well, will I leave? Will I stay? What are all the time frames on this? What's going to be possible? Initially I was considering also going to the UK, where I'm a citizen, and so that all these things were up in the air. It was a very uncertain, confusing time. And what happened is that I decided to leave in June on one of the, at that time, last sort of scheduled flights, Qantas flights out of the US. And that was quite grim. I won't forget Los Angeles International Airport really shut down and dark, a lot of it. The flight back was professional, but people were very nervous.
Including the staff?
Including the staff,
Yeah.
including the staff.
Of you, that you might have been infectious, or
Well, I think so, yes.
yeah. Did you have to wear a mask on the plane?
Oh, absolutely.
You did, yeah. It's a long time to wear a mask, isn't it?
Yeah. And then I did the 2-week hotel quarantine in Melbourne at the Crown Metropole, which was very dull, but well done and professional, and had a couple of very bleak fresh air breaks, so-called fresh air breaks. But, you know, it was important to do, and it was protecting public health, and so I was happy to do it and grateful that I could do it.
And then your parents came down to get you in Melbourne, and
Yes.
in the brief window of opportunity that they could do so, is that right?
That's right, yes. And so that was, well, the last time I saw Sam and Zoe and Greg and Felix and Otto in Melbourne, my cousins. And yeah, that was, again, a sort of uncertain time because the outbreak was starting in Melbourne. And I remember being there and walking around Melbourne after I'd finished the quarantine and thinking, God, we all need to be wearing masks. Like, this is happening here, you know. And then, you know, shortly after we left, about a week to 10 days, I think that the borders actually closed between New South Wales and Victoria, which I don't think people saw coming.
A lot of people, I think, were trapped, basically.
Yeah.
Yes, it's made it hard, didn't it? So you got back to the ACT, and you have managed to resume some public performance, is that right? Yeah.
That's right. Yes, I did a recital at the end of July.
Yeah.
And I'll be doing some more concerts, and I've done some house concerts, and the sort of symphony orchestra concerts are starting to begin again in Canberra. So there are things happening.
Yes,
now.
yes. And yet, in conclusion, what would you like to say about your future as an international artist as well as an Australian performer?
I like being able to travel, and I know that that's a privileged thing to do, but I love being in other cultures and performing and having had something of a career in the US, and I really want that to happen again. And it will be interesting to see how the future of travel evolves, but I wouldn't like to lose that in the long term.
Thanks, Toby.